I don't know why, but Redfall felt like it was headed down the exact same road as another game I reviewed just 3 short months ago. I mean, we all remember Forspoken, right? Redfall was showing all those familiar symptoms of just stumbling up to launch day, from the announcement that it would be locked to just 30 FPS on consoles with no performance mode option, how it would feature de novo DRM despite it affecting performance, and of course the backlash the developers faced when they made it known that Redfall, even when in single-player mode, would require a constant online connection. A mechanic they claimed would be removed, but as of the date of my review is, yes, still in the live game. And of course, who could forget that IGN first look gameplay footage, which was just brutal. As I said, Redfall seemed to be suffering the same sort of lead up to launch illness as Forspoken suffered from. And so when these early reviews started pouring out, I thought to myself, yeah, these review scores are rough, but there's no way this is another Forspoken. So, off to Steam I headed, spent another $70 because Redfall is one of these new premium price titles, downloaded the nearly 78 gig game, went in with a resolute mindset to actually finish this one up, and I failed miserably. TLDR, I tapped out of Redfall after all of just 47 minutes. This is LtBuzzLitebeer, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Now, I'm not going to be giving you a full decimal point breakdown of every specific detail of Redfall, but I did want to touch on a few of the aspects of this latest offering from Arkane Studios. Yes, the very same Arkane who created such acclaimed titles as Dishonored, Deathloop, and Prey. And wow, those days feel like centuries ago. But anyways, enough of the past. Let's get into Redfall. Before we dive into the body of this one, I wanted to mention that I will leave a handy timestamp in the video description and pinned comment, in case you want to jump around to the different chapters for this review. I'm going to be breaking this one down into 3 main areas: story, gameplay, and PC performance. Make use of those timestamps. Don't use them. It's there for you just to make it easier to get where you want to go. Okay, so on to the story of Redfall. And of every portion of the game I have thus encountered, this was the bit that actually showed the most potential. Now, while the story of vampires on the loose completely overtaking a small town is really nothing new, it still works. You begin as one of 4 preset class characters, and you begin to rid this town of its vampire infestation zone by zone. Of course, aided by the normal assortment of ballistic weaponry, you also have classes, which include special abilities and skill trees to augment your superpowers. The overall art style of Redfall is saturated in color. Think Borderlands, but scaled back, and the Unreal Engine does its absolute best to present some interesting landscapes. That being said, Redfall already looks like it's 10 years old, featuring tons of low-res objects, heavy pop-in, and in general, it just doesn't look very good. One item I wanted to zero in on was how objects would change from 2D at distance to 3D the closer you came to the area, and it was downright ugly. That change, or mesh, should be seamless, but in Redfall, it is jarring. Last 2 points I wanted to make before moving on were, first, that I lost track of how many objects I saw that were overlapping or clipping, and second, even when playing on my high-end PC setup, skating NPCs or NPCs displaying weird motions were to be found. Of the 4 classes, I chose to play as Defender, the verified cryptid hunter, whatever that means, who, when he does speak, mixes some interesting story, lore, and context, and with some "I didn't need to hear that" cringy comments. The basics of this game are downright simple and formulaic. Take on the missions, kill the hordes, rid the town of lesser vampires to reach a stronger vampire, drive a stake through that vampire's heart, and progress to the next set of tasks, and it never varies from this formula. And as you progress through this gameplay loop, you're going to find higher and higher level weapons and supplies, not only for your own needs, but for the needs of the NPCs you've befriended. Now, one area that really struck me as inadequate was how the lore and story for Redfall was presented. This game uses this system of notes and static still shots to build the plot, and it never seems to deviate from here. You are constantly finding scribbled notes, pictures, reading through them, seeing a cinematic of still slides, by the way, no cutscenes with animations, and it all feels so incomplete and low budget. There's a game here with a direction that could have been used, but Arkane has gone with this half-baked presentation style that a AAA $70 premium price title should never be using. I don't want to spend too much time harping on this facet alone, just know that it is extremely underwhelming. The way that Redfall presents plot, their presentation, the art style, even the gameplay loop itself, you honestly don't care about what you're doing, who you are using as a character class, their history and bio, and I'm just being honest here, I started skipping through NPC interactions after about 30 minutes of starting up this game. In terms of that gameplay loop, Redfall doesn't create any buzz here as well. And of all the parts of this game that fail, which is pretty much all of them, gameplay and specifically combat is downright laughable. First off is the world itself, which is severely underpopulated. It's lifeless and boring. One of the chief complaints I had with Forspoken as well. Big open world, nothing to do. There are these small roving bands of cultists that carry standard firearms, who happen to be the most brain-dead and waste of time NPCs I believe I've ever seen in a video game, and I do mean ever. They are oblivious to their surroundings, and anything short of running up to them and punching them straight in the chops will not draw their aggression. It became this amusing act to see if I could sneak up on them from behind and hit them with a melee strike, which, when performed from the rear, is a one-shot kill. Then the game's wonky ragdoll mechanics would take over, as if my crouched elbow from behind would launch a grown-ass man 10 to 12 feet in a random direction. This was fun for about 10 minutes, but ultimately boredom again set in. Now, the harder foes to tackle are the vampires, as they absorb a lot more damage, and they have the ability to whisk around, much like a teleport. I actually forced myself into a daytime vampire safe house of sorts, and I took on something like 6 or 7 of them at point-blank range. But again, they are also quite brain-dead, and kiting them around in the different rooms of the house allowed me time to reload my shotgun and use the choke points to my advantage. Overall difficulty to Redfall is laughable. Even on the hardest difficulty, the NPCs are simply able to absorb more damage, but even then, you will destroy anything you encounter. The game does present you with an intel report of sorts as you approach mission structure, such as, hey, you can go in through the roof, there's a back door, or there is an underground pipe. But I found anything less than going in full guns blazing was an absolute waste of time. In a pinch, the numerous environmental objects you find can be ignited or destroyed to create explosions and damaging electrical effects. Yeah, I've covered this portion in a bit of detail, but allow me to disabuse you of the notion that the gameplay loop of Redfall is robust or that combat is unique and innovative. It's quite the opposite. For me, one of the most shocking aspects about Redfall is this wild and unbalanced mix of the game file itself, which is a bit large, the missing UI and scarce PC settings, there's something like 12 total settings you can change, and after all of that, just how poorly the game runs. Now, when I took a tour through the video settings and seeing the art style, I initially thought my PC would absolutely rip this game to shreds. Now, for reference, I have a Threadripper Pro 3975WX CPU, a 3090 GPU, and 256 gigs of RAM. My rig is a beast, and I thought 120 FPS and 4K, here we come. I was wrong. Redfall is an unoptimized, frame-dropping, stuttering disaster of a visual product. There are 4 menu options that will have an effect on visual quality, including overall quality, this is like texture quality, which can use a standard preset, I used Epic, or you can go in there and custom set up items to your individual needs. There's also upscaling and DLSS quality, which are both NVIDIA, and then there's reflex low latency toggle, and that's it. Also, on a quick side note, I wanted to say that I crashed once when I first launched the game after install, and the second attempt at launching got the game to open, but the intro screen only showed the background and I can hear the background music. There were no menu options. I couldn't see the option to continue the game into setups, and anytime I clicked anywhere on the screen, it brought up the customization menu. I had to close and reset. Anyways, my third attempt finally got me into the game, and I did not crash thereafter. And speaking of the customization menu, the entire menu and the UI in general is just really scaled down. There are next to no options here, and some of them honestly don't function properly. For instance, I'm not a huge fan of next weapon cycling using the mouse scroll wheel when you have 3 weapons. Yes, there is full remapping available, but this one item serves as a microcosm of how this game functions. When you scroll to the next or previous weapon, the game will constantly skip over one of your 3 equipped weapons. I found myself staring more at the equipped weapons to confirm what my character had selected than the actual gameplay and combat. The game does work on mouse and keyboard, but overall everything felt really clunky and heavily weighted, too much so. Redfall would have actually greatly benefited from a much more robust video settings menu and even a benchmark tool to help stabilize these wild frame rates. Huge stutters and frame drops were present, and micro stutters when you would rotate or move from one zone to the next were the norm. Now, I've not attempted to play Redfall on Xbox, but I don't see it performing any better than my PC setup, meaning that the performance is quite lacking, which is odd, especially when you consider the lack of anything really going on the screen within the game and the reduced graphical fidelity embracing this color-saturated art style. Okay, let's get down to the real portion of the video. My recommendations. Redfall. Should you play or should you pass? And no offense to Arkane or any of the devs who spent untold hours creating this title, but I would and could not recommend this game to anyone at any time. Even though it is free on Xbox Game Pass as a day one exclusive, I would still say to save your time and try something else. If Arkane came through with a mega patch and it was all of a sudden running at a buttery smooth 4K 240 frames per second, it will remain, and it must remain, a hard pass. There is so much about Redfall that is a shock to the system. This AAA, elevated premium price tag, the unoptimized and wild frame rate launch product, the boring and shallow gameplay loop, the dead open world, the entire thing outside of the plot concept just feels phoned in, incomplete, and unpolished. Xbox needed to hit it, and hit it big with Redfall, and it failed. Again, bringing to light that $8 billion acquisition of Bethesda. I mean, this was their first AAA release since that deal, and it didn't play out so well. I've tried my best to break this one down for you in a compact, easy-to-watch format, but TLDR, there is nothing under the hood of Redfall worthy of note. Thinking on it a bit more, and one wonders why Arkane, who specialize in immersive sims, were tasked with making, of all things, an online co-op looter shooter. Arkane made the wrong game, and they made it poorly. And the PR team at Bethesda knew it. Now, when a studio is supremely confident of their creations, you see review copies going out 1 to 2 weeks before launch, with embargoes usually being lifted 24 hours before live launch. By contrast, Redfall review copies were extremely rare and sent out just 3 days prior to go live, with review embargo times being lifted only after the game was fully launched and live. Who does that, except maybe a company and publisher who knew they had wet the bed with their latest creation? I saw this tweet and I felt it so perfectly encapsulates the spirit of this game. Redfall lacks everything apart from disappointment. As always, leave me your feedback about anything Redfall related, and I will of course do my best to respond. If you happen to like the video, maybe consider hitting subscribe, and while you're at it, ring the notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. You can always find and follow me over on Twitch, Twitter, and in my open community Discord server, links to all of which can be found in the video description. Shout out to the over 119,000 of you that have taken the leap and hit subscribe, and as always, a huge thanks goes out to my patrons over on Patreon. Until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer, signing off.